Hey, Randy Joe here, and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to do something a little different, something we don't normally do on this channel, which is not a reaction video. I'm not reacting to any albums I haven't heard before. In fact, I've heard every single album we are going to listen to today, and that, of course, is going to be a David Bowie tier list / ranking. Now, why am I doing a David Bowie tier list out of the blue? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, my channel recently hit 1,000 subscribers, which I spoke on in an earlier reaction video, and I just want to say thank you to all 1,000 of you. In fact, I think as of recording, we're at 1,050, so I'm a little behind. I was trying to get this out as soon as possible, but of course, I wanted to focus on the reaction videos and not try to fall too far behind. But still, here we are, 1,000 subscribers. Extremely grateful. Cannot believe it. I feel very lucky. I feel very honored that 1,000 people decided to subscribe to my channel simply because they like what I'm talking about and they enjoy the content I make. I can't believe it. It feels baffling to me. And I've been wanting to thank you guys with this form of a video being a David Bowie tier list ranking video. The second reason why I'm doing this is because I've always wanted to. I'm a huge David Bowie fan, David Bowie nerd. As you could tell, I have 3 David Bowie albums in the background, one of many that I own on vinyl. I just wanted to pick those 3 specifically because I love them so much. They jumped out to me when I was going through my selection here. And on top of that, as you can see, I also have a David Bowie poster here referencing Rebel Rebel, given to me by my wonderful sister. And I also have the David Bowie playing cards here. And if it wasn't enough, way up here, might be out of view, right there, I got a David Bowie guitar pick, which I don't play guitar. I feel like I probably should now that I have a pick for it. But my point is, a huge David Bowie fan, and if that wasn't even more apparent, I even in fact have a David Bowie tattoo. The guy is branded on me for life, which makes sense considering he was also the musician that got me into being a music nerd myself. Without listening to his album Ziggy Stardust, which we'll talk about obviously in this video, I would not be doing this channel most likely. Quite plain and simple, he really did impact me to the point where I became obsessed with music. On a daily basis, I listen to music, new music, fresh music, old music, whatever music, because I loved Ziggy Stardust so very much. Now I'm going to quit my rambling because you've heard me ramble long enough, and at this point, let's just jump into it because, again, I'm excited. If I haven't put it on the screen already, here is the tier list. Quickly whipped it up in Photoshop to the best of my abilities. And we're going to go one by one, starting from the beginning of his career all the way to his final album, his unfortunate swan song album, Black Star. So kicking it off, back in 1967, we got our boy David Bowie with the self-titled LP, David Bowie. Now, what is there to say about this one? This is not, by many people's standards, the true start to David Bowie's discography. Even David Bowie himself seems to have written it off on many occasions, very rarely ever really referencing it or singing any songs from it live. And obviously the reason being it is not very indicative of his style, of his genre that he'd become known for. It isn't a very good example of his personality either. It is kind of a lackluster album, one might say, that feels like it was kind of just chasing the trends of the 60s. Feels very folk rock-ish, feels a little silly at times, and was even released and made around the time that he made the infamous track The Laughing Gnome, which, if you've heard that, you can understand why this LP, in similar style and tone, was not as well received and is not as fondly looked at by many fans. That being said, there is still quite a bit on here that I enjoy. Uncle Arthur kicks it off. I think that's a solid track. It's a little silly, like most of this album. I feel like you have to embrace the cheesiness, the campiness of this album to really appreciate any sort of merit it may have. Now, aside from Uncle Arthur, there's some other decent tracks, specifically, the track She's Got Medals. I know some people really enjoy that one. There's Love You Till Tuesday, which I actually think is quite a cute yet campy track still. But of course, Please Mr. Gravedigger is the one I want to speak on real quickly, because despite the fact that it is not necessarily a notable track, and it is not too, I would say, spectacular in its own right. It is indicative and kind of a hint at what's to come for Bowie because it creates a bit of a character, that being kind of like a grave digger. And I feel like, it hints at what's to come with Bowie's kind of character focus in his albums, obviously, such as Ziggy or Halloween Jack, of course, from Diamond Dogs, or many of his other notable characters. Aladdin Sane, the clown from Scary Monsters that I'm forgetting the name of. Very brief character, but still a character. And of course, Major Tom, which we can't forget. But my point is, this debut album, it's a hint of what's to come, but it's not a very good example of his talent. So let's put this in the tier ranking. It's definitely going to be below C because I do think it is quite a mediocre album. C would be an average album to me. So let's drop it down in kind of like right here. It's somewhere between a D and an E. Not a great album, but it certainly has some elements that are worth note. Next, David Bowie's 1969 album, and that being also self-titled David Bowie. This one is a lot more indicative of David Bowie's kind of specific style and tone. This is, to many, the true start of the Bowie discography. Has some incredible tracks on there as well, some very underrated tracks as well. You've got, of course, Space Oddity with the incredible character Major Tom being introduced in the Bowie discography. And you have tracks on here that are often, it seems to be, forgotten by a lot of people. Memory of a Free Festival, incredible, great kind of counterculture sort of track, tackling hippie culture in a sense. While tracks like Signet Committee is also incredible. It's a 10-minute epic, one of the longest Bowie tracks in the discography. It might actually be the longest, although Station to Station may have that beat, but still, Signet Committee is incredible and a must listen to if you're interested in Bowie, especially Bowie's early work. But on top of that, there's also tracks like Wild Eye Boy from Free Cloud, which is also a really great track, and Unwashed and Somewhat Slightly Dazed, which I think is an incredibly underrated track, and actually, gun to my head, might be my favorite track from this album, maybe my second favorite. I do think Signet Committee is probably the most spectacular. That being said, there are certain elements to this LP that still hold it back. It doesn't feel as fully focused. Kind of goes back between folk rock and kind of psychedelic rock as well. Doesn't really have a strong footing on its overall tone and atmosphere at times, but there are elements to this album that are certainly fantastic. Production's a little dated, but still incredibly impactful album and a must listen to for the Bowie discography because I feel like it makes a big difference in his career, obviously with Space Oddity being such a great track. Next, we got The Man Who Sold the World, arguably, to some, a metal album. I don't know if I'd call it a metal album personally. I think there's metal elements, but I wouldn't call this quite metal. I'd call it more hard rock, perhaps, with a mix of glam, kind of teasing what's to come once again with Bowie. But you have the title track here, The Man Who Sold the World. What is there to say about this one? The Man Who Sold the World, title track, a masterpiece. It is one of Bowie's best tracks of the 70s, which is saying a lot. His 70s output was massive, but this track has an incredible atmosphere, a really great sense of structure and lyricism. The kind of themes addressed here about this all-powerful, it would seem, figure who is as kind of mysterious as he is bold and powerful. Really great track that has been covered many times. But of course, there's other elements here on this album. The Width of the Circle is a really great track. Kicks things off strong with a very powerful instrumental that continues to grow. And there's also, of course, themes of the occult, the supernatural, the spiritual that run very deep into the roots of this album. And there's some tracks here that, of course, I would say don't stick the landing. I'm not a huge fan of tracks like After All. Feels like it is kind of an extra. She Shook Me Cold, and even Savior Machine don't really do too much for me, but still, there is still a lot here to appreciate, still a lot here to love and enjoy, but it isn't, and this might be a hot take to some, it isn't, to me, an album that I go back to as much as Space Oddity. I would say this one here And don't kill me here. This one here would be kind of like in the B tier still. It's still a great record with a lot to offer, but it isn't perfect. It has a lot more blemishes, as again, Bowie is just trying to figure out his sound and style. But I would say it's not as strong as this one. That's why I'm putting it, as you can see in the ranking, down lower. So that's how we're going to do things, just to quickly address. The more front focused it is, the higher it is. And of course, if it's S tier, it's better than the tiers. You know how tiers work. I don't need to address that. But let's address Hunky Dory. 1971. This is really Bowie coming into fully into his own. 8-line poem. I don't know why that's the first one I thought of, but 8-line poem is a really great track. Life on Mars. Incredible. Great sense of atmosphere. Great glam rock track that is really showcasing what's to come with Ziggy Stardust. This is David Bowie, I would say, perhaps the most confident he has been at this point. He feels very sure of himself. He feels very knowledgeable in what he's singing about and what he wants to address specifically. He blends in elements of folk and rock and psychedelic rock and glam rock all together in a beautifully tight package here. There aren't many elements of this LP that I don't enjoy. I find it is a very easily listening record. It has a lot of great transitional moments too, as tracks kind of go from one to the next with ease. And of course, it has some incredible songwriting throughout. Like I said, Life on Mars, Changes, 8-line poem, the Bowie brothers, Oh You Pretty Things, which I can't believe I almost forgot that. That is an incredible track in its own right. But we do have Kooks on here. And that's all I'll say about that. We do have Kooks on here. And, boy, do I feel like a kook whenever I hear that one. So, Hunky Dory, though, is certainly one of his strongest efforts at this point. In fact, it is his strongest effort at this point. Who am I kidding? This is an A-tier record. A-tier to me is like an 8 or a 9 at this point. An S would be like a high 9 to a 10. So to me, this is a solid, like an 8.5 record. It's incredible. It's just easy listening. The only thing holding it back maybe is a slightly dated production to some. And I would also say that I just don't enjoy it through and through as much as, of course, some of his other records. And I feel like really you got tracks like Kooks on there that hold it back, and the song for Bob Dylan I'm not personally a fan of either. That's just me, though. Ziggy Stardust, though, I don't even know if we don't really have to talk about this one. It's Ziggy Stardust, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Gotta say the whole title, guys. This one here got me into music. I want to address that in another video in its entirety, but if it wasn't for this album, I would not be the music fan I am today. Incredible, transcendental concept record about a space alien who comes down from outer space to save the planet from a 5-year impending doom. There's not much to say more about the themes than that. I feel like the concept in itself is just so batshit insane that it's kind of impressive that someone even came up with this in the early 70s. But maybe it's also kind of appropriate because it feels like a drug-fueled idea. Not that Bowie was doing too many drugs as far as I know at this point. Still, this thing is a mammoth of a record despite being quite short. It doesn't even hit the 40-minute mark. And you have just banger after banger after banger, kicking it off with 5 years, gets super climactic. You got obviously great tracks like Suffragette City, those bangers. You've got incredible tracks like Rock and Roll Suicide to close it out, getting more heartfelt, of course. Honestly, this thing is a mammoth. Even the weak track by a lot of people's standards, the cover of It Ain't Easy, is still, in my opinion, a perfect track. I think Bowie nails that cover. And everything here flows from one track to the next quite gorgeously, creates a great story that is as loose as it is concrete, meaning you can sort of develop your own ideas of this story and narrative, but it's loose enough that it's kind of hard to have a strong pinpoint of it. and one can disagree with another about the structure. There really isn't too much more to say. Moon Age Daydreams on here. Hang On to Yourself is a masterpiece. Star is incredibly heartfelt, while it's at the same time very explosive. This is an S tier record. Like, let's not even debate it anymore. Everybody knows this is S tier. Let's throw that in S tier. Aladdin Sane. This is where Ziggy Stardust goes to America, as the tagline was. Ziggy, this isn't Ziggy. This is a different character. Keep in mind, this is Aladdin Sane. Obviously the little pun there, Alad Insane. I don't need to spell it out for you guys. You're a Bowie fan, I'd assume, watching this. You know the drill. This is Bowie's edgier, harder Ziggy Stardust. He is more Rolling Stones infused, perhaps. He is more drug induced. But goddamn, is this another great album. Underrated, actually. I know you're probably thinking, wow, how is this underrated? It has one of the most iconic covers of all time. Well, people often label this Ziggy Stardust. Obviously, very similar conceptually this character is. But I feel like the tracks here are not often talked about as much as they should. Lady Grinning Soul, Drivin' Saturday, amazing. Time, one of the best tracks named Time. A better track than one might say Pink Floyd's Time. Put a gun to my head, I don't care. It's incredible. That is how good that track is. Panic in Detroit is on here. Very edgy, very aggressive sound. Watch that man explodes on the scene with that opening track. This thing is a very beautifully epic album with still pretty great production by today's standards that showcases a much edgier, more in-your-face David Bowie. That is incredible. And I will say, this is not as strong as Ziggy Stardust, but it is a worthy companion, a worthy successor, and certainly, of course, another must-listen. I would say that this album, is probably, it's going to be an A tier record. It's not quite S tier. There are certain things about it that I would say, don't interest me as much. Specifically the track Let's Spend the Night Together being the weakest. But if I had to pick between Hunky Dory and Aladdin Sane in this case, since they're both falling on that A tier track, I would actually put I would put Aladdin Sane above it. So Hunky Dory, just going down over here. That's okay. Next we've got Pinups. This album, I do not like. I'm just going to be honest. I don't like this record. In fact, it's probably one of my least favorite Bowie records. It might be actually, no, it's not my least favorite Bowie record, but it's one of my least favorite Bowie records. There's elements of this album that, of course, you can enjoy. The Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane kind of elements tied into it. The whole glam rock feel to it is still very much present, but it's not as edgy as an Aladdin Sane, and it's certainly not as interesting as a Ziggy Stardust. Instead, it is an entire album made up of covers of other artists' work. And unfortunately, a lot of these covers just aren't very interesting. In fact, I don't think I care about any of these covers. I don't think Bowie does covers very well. If I'm being completely transparent here, even his cover on Young Americans of Across the Universe, I think is kind of a disaster, and it's not one I ever go back to. But even that I'll at least listen to if I'm listening to the whole album. Pinups, though, is not an album in general I ever go to, whereas Young Americans I at least do. So Pinups is pretty bad. If I'm being as harsh as I can be without being too overblown, this is probably going to be, it's lower than the debut. I'll just say that. I think as weird as the debut is, as dated as it is, as campy as it is, it at least has more interesting ideas, whereas this just feels like he was trying to do something unique, or like he was trying to cash in on maybe other musicians' fame, but still showing his appreciation for them, don't get me wrong. But it's not very interesting, and all the covers here are not nearly as interesting as the original the original tracks. So, Pinups E. This is like 3 out of 10 territory, if I'm being blunt here. Diamond Dogs is next. Continuing the glam rock sort of ideas, the glam rock image, you got Halloween Jack here, who honestly is a hit maker. Rebel Rebel, incredible hit, incredible song. Diamond Dogs, the title track, super fun, great stadium feel to it. Feels very live, feels very alive as well. In the second half of this record, jumping into the 1984 George Orwell play, one might say, theatrical sort of elements, is also, if you can get into that sort of theater kid mindset, a lot of fun. I feel like it paints a picture quite vividly, despite the fact that Bowie didn't have the rights to 1984 for a play like he wanted. He just took some ideas, made it his own, threw it all together on the second half of this album, where the first half is clearly much more focused on Halloween Jack and the city that Diamond Dogs takes place in, which I'm forgetting the name of. I know it kicks off the album. But this does have We Are the Dead on it, which I think is a really nice kind of proto-punk song, to be quite honest with you. Very punk-inspired, before punk really took hold of the music industry. And you have, honestly, maybe one of David Bowie's most ambitious ideas, at least at that point, which was the Sweet Thing Sweet, the 3-track incredible epic that is 10 minutes long, and really just takes a hold of you. I think it is an incredible 3-track epic. It is a great suite that is definitely worth a listen if you're interested in Bowie's more theatrical side and what he has to offer in his songwriting sensibilities. It's just got a great sense of tone and structure and atmosphere throughout the entire album, but that track, that suite specifically, does feel very powerful. But this album, all on its own, is a little messy. If we're looking at it as a whole, it is a little bit more messy than some of his other projects before this. It is a mishmash of 2 ideas, kind of Bowie's own dystopian world with Halloween Jack and 1984. And for that, I do find this record as a whole a little bit hard to put above some of these other albums here. But I would put it in the B tier. It's like a high 8, has great tracks across the board, but it certainly has its flaws, such as its messiness that hold it back, which is why I'll put it above his 1969 self-titled album, but below Hunky Dory. I do come back to Diamond Dogs more often than I do Space Oddity, David Bowie. Young Americans. Young Americans, young Americans, we are the young Americans. I'm not a very good singer, so apologize for that. I did not like this album when I first heard it. Let's be blunt here. I didn't enjoy this album all that much. I liked the title track. I liked Fame, but I found it a little bland. I found it a little lacking in ideas. But then I listened to it again on this channel as a reaction video, and I actually found myself appreciating it more that time. I feel like maybe I gave it more thought. I kind of dove into it a little bit more in depth, and I actually do enjoy this record now. I actually think this is quite a solid record. Again, this is Bowie's, I would say, transitional record, in the sense that he's switching off from glam. He's finally leaving the glam rock aesthetics behind, and he's diving into soul. Plastic soul, a genre he deemed kind of like an imitation of soul. The white boy soul kind of feels almost like a facade, as if the character himself doesn't necessarily really feel the soul in him and is instead imitating other soul musicians, perhaps. It has a very, I would say, cold sound to it, yet trying to imitate a warmth of more richer soul. But that's the very idea that he captures with Plastic Soul, I would say. And with Young Americans, like I said, it is a transitional record. It's not as strong as what's to come, and you know what's to come if you're a Bowie fan. But it is a very interesting record in its own right that certainly has some great ideas. You also have John Lennon on here, which, what is there to say about Lennon? He's a legend in his own right, but he provides just backup vocals on Fame, which I think is kind of funny to think about. But speaking of Lennon, it does contain Across the Universe on here, which is a cover, of course, of the Beatles' Across the Universe. But this one is kind of bad. I actually hate his cover. I'm sorry. I've tried. But no matter how many times I listen to Across the Universe from Bowie, it does not land. That being said, I'd probably put this in the C tier. So when I say I like this record, I like it as a transitional idea. I like elements of it. I like the soul trajectory. And I like the title track and Fame especially. But there's some other great tracks on here. Win, I think, is pretty fantastic. But as a whole, it also feels a little bland, a little lackluster, which might be a hot take to many. You know what isn't bland? It's Station to Station. Station to Station is incredible. When you compare it to what he was doing on Young Americans, he takes the concept of Young Americans, the ideas he put forth there, and he somehow takes a record that is like a 5, a 6, that being Young Americans, up to a record that is pretty much near perfect. That opening track, Station to Station, that the title track, is one of the single greatest tracks of the 70s period. It's one of David Bowie's best tracks. It might be David Bowie's best track. If you put a gun to my head, I don't know if I would say it is number one, but it is certainly in the top 5 of Bowie tracks, which is a lot considering there's 26 albums. It's got a cold sound as we introduced the Thin White Duke, a character who is kind of devoid of emotion, almost like a sociopath in his own right. And this is Bowie when he was at his darkest period in life, addicted to coke, unsurprisingly, and doing some other hard drugs, as well as having a diet consisting entirely of red peppers and milk. A diet that I would not suggest, which explains his very thin figure at the time, as well as, obviously, the coke didn't help. The coke certainly did not help the weight loss. But, of course, aside from the title track here, TVC15 is super funky, super fun, a great soul kind of funk fusion. You also have Golden Years, which is obviously a hit, a incredible hit that is still played quite commonly on the radio because it's so fun, it's so catchy, it's so ambitious, while at the same time being quite a tight 4 minutes. Word on a Wing is also really great, and Wild as the Wind. I don't know why I don't have them liked on Spotify. They're both incredible. And Stay has like this very ominous, disturbed, but fast-paced tone to it that I thoroughly enjoy. And quite honestly, another thing about Stay is it's 6 minutes, and it pads out that time quite smoothly, just as smooth as the character himself. Station to Station, Thin White Duke. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a stronger record than Aladdin Sane. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is like a solid 9 out of 10 record, and I'm going to throw that up. Station to Station is going to go up with Ziggy Stardust. It's not as good as Ziggy Stardust. Let's be frank here. As great as the title track is of Station to Station, Ziggy Stardust, a much more ambitious whole concept album that I feel like really sticks the landing from front to back, whereas Station to Station is a much more loose album conceptually, but still obviously has banger after banger after banger. So much more wide emotion on Ziggy, but much more maybe complex arrangements on Station to Station. So whatever your liking is where it's going to be. Low by David Bowie. Let's just prepare things here. Let's move these over. Low is one of the greatest albums ever made. It's behind me right here. It's the record that I probably have on my wall. I have more shelves above me that you can't see, but I have this record on my wall probably more than any other record I've ever owned. This is actually one of the first records I bought, actually. And this, I remember when I first heard it, was such an incredible album that I listened to it before bed, and I could not sleep because of how much of an impact this made on me. I could not believe how baffling, how beautiful, how epic this album feels, while still feeling quite minimal and cold and kind of distant. I love this record. It is easily in my top 10 albums of all time, and would probably, if I was really to think about it, gonna make it in my top 5. Sound and Vision, Breaking Glass, the opening track, Speed of Life, a really great instrumental, New Career in Town, The entire second side, with Brian Eno's contributions as well on the production, creating a very unique, cold, ambient atmosphere that creates an entire time period and location that I did not exist in, yet feels like it transported me there. So for that, I think this record is a must listen to, a perfect album, a 10 out of 10 record, a masterpiece. I'm gushing over it enough. Let's put it S tier, and let's just call it what it is. There's no album from this point forward that's gonna hit higher than this. This is the best Bowie record, point blank. Following Low with the Berlin trilogy, he continues here, which didn't really take hold until the third LP, Lodger, but we're not going to address that right now. Instead, we're going to talk about Heroes, which is the sequel to Low. Continues some ideas from Low, with the second side being purely ambient, but this one is much more, maybe edgier, one might say, more traditional rock focused. Beauty and the Beast is a really great punk inspired sound to it that feels a little choppy, intentionally so, very cold, and overall quite disturbed, like the rest of the album truly is. You've got Joe the Lion, where he belts it out in a punk sort of, again, fashion. This does feel like there are elements of punk, but there are elements of art rock. There are elements of ambient, all tied throughout this entire thing. Heroes, one of Bowie's biggest songs for obvious reasons. Very heartfelt, very emotional. A great love kind of triangle kind of being painted in this track. One of a affair kind of coming to an end. But going from tracks, 6 to 9, but specifically 7 to 9 I want to address. You have an ambient suite that is just as powerful, just as rich, and perhaps more focused and maybe even more interesting than the ambient side of Low. Now you're probably thinking, wow, this sounds like an S tier record. This sounds like one of the best Bowie albums, but it does end on Secret Life of Arabia, which I do not care for personally. That maybe draws it a little bit back, and it does feel like Secret Life of Arabia doesn't fit thematically, stylistically on the album. It feels very different to me instrumentally and just overall atmosphere. That being said, there is still a lot to appreciate here. This is a worthy successor to Low, and I'm going to go ahead and throw it. This is a hard one. We're going to go ahead and put this in A tier as well, and I would say it is, honestly, we'll put Hunky Dory. Heroes, a better record than Hunky Dory in the ranking here, but not quite as strong maybe as Aladdin Sane. No, that's fucking bullshit. That's bullshit. There we go. I feel confident with that. Heroes is A tier for sure, and it is also above Aladdin Sane and just below Station to Station on my ranking so far. Things are subject to change. Let's get to Lodger, the third record in the Berlin trilogy, something that wasn't, like I said, really concocted in the making. It was something that was kind of labeled after the fact as a way to push sales, it would seem, as a way to kind of come up with something that is a little bit more interesting to people who might have fallen off the Bowie bandwagon. But still, I can understand calling it the Berlin trilogy, despite the fact that the first two records were not made entirely in Berlin. In fact, Low, I don't even think was made whatsoever in Berlin, whereas Elements of Heroes was and Lodger was in full, I think. I could be wrong on that fact. Maybe I've forgotten some of my facts there. But Lodger is still similar in tone to those two, but not nearly as closely related, I would say, as Low and Heroes. They feel like a brother and sister kind of LP, whereas Lodger is like the distant cousin, because it does have some of the unique sort of DNA that makes up those records in its production and sound, but it doesn't have the kind of ambient, side B. Bowie's unique take on a kind of like a postcard album, every track kind of being like you're traveling around the world. There are tracks on here I do like, specifically Red Money. I love Red Money. I thought it was a really great track. Boys Keep Swinging is fun. It's a nice little hit. And Fantastic Voyage does kick off this thing quite strong. That being said, this is an album of his I don't often go back to. I think it is him feeling a little bit more creatively stretched out. Does not stick the landing as much as some other records. In fact, I'd call this a solid. It's going C tier. It's going C. I gotta be honest with you guys. As much as I want to love this record, I don't find myself going back to it that much. I find it is a little bit more dated than some of the other albums. It is certainly more dated than Low and Heroes, which came out obviously prior to it. And on top of that, the songwriting here is just not as interesting. Let's just call it as it is. It's a C tier record. It's a solid 5, maybe a 6 on a good day, but not an album I find myself wanting to go back to. That one might have been a hot take. Maybe I have some people clicking off the video now, but that's okay. We can't agree on everything here. Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, however, the album we're addressing now, 1980, kicking off the 80s. Wow. Just wow. A new wave, punk aesthetic, art rock aesthetic record. Bowie here feels very refreshed, feels very new, feels like a brand new bitch, one might even say, because this thing is edgy, this thing is hard, this thing addresses fascism in the fashion industry as a comparison. This thing addresses homophobia in a world that is very homophobic, especially at the time, really before the entire AIDS crisis fully took over too. And on top of that, you have Bowie kind of addressing the drug-fueled life he had been living for almost a decade at that point, with the track Ashes to Ashes, a sequel to Space Oddity, where we see Major Tom back in full effect, riddled with a drug addiction, this time kind of like a space dust, it would seem, is the comparison here. Bowie's very kind of autobiographical album. It feels like there's a lot of ideas throughout this LP that existed on earlier albums, but here he is updating it to a much more edgier, more confrontational approach, more autobiographical, addressing his life. And honestly, as far as this LP goes, the only track I'm not the biggest fan of, the one I don't come back to that much individually, however, I will listen to it in the full album within its context, is Because You're Young. It's still a pretty decent track, but it's not one I find myself wanting to really listen to on its own, whereas the rest are just incredible, catchy, with Up the Hill Backwards, horror-esque, kind of fun Halloween-esque tone with the title track, Ashes to Ashes, the Major Tom follow-up, fashion. I already addressed it. My point is, this thing, especially with It's No Game Part 1 and Part 2, kind of bookending the album so concretely, so beautifully wrapping things together. This is a really great return to form after Lodger's slightly kind of messy output, I would say. And also, this is one of Bowie's best records. Let's just be honest. So that's going to be S tier. This is a solid 9 out of 10 to a 10. It is a record that at one point I said was a strong 10 out of 10 to me, but it is one now that I would put as low as a 9, depending on the day. Is it as good as a Low? No. Is it as good as a Ziggy Stardust? No. Is it as good as a Station to Station? It's close. In fact, I would go ahead and put Scary Monsters above Station to Station. Again, if you're mad, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'm okay with a little bit of anger thrown my way. Just be polite about it. Because we all have our opinions, and my opinion is that Scary Monsters is a stronger and more instantly catchy album than Station to Station, which, again, Station to Station is an incredibly complex record with great arrangements and a great atmosphere throughout. But man, the fun factor, the catchiness, the new wave elements of Scary Monsters really draws me back, has a lot more replayability going for it. And for that, I'll put it above Station to Station, but not as high as Scary Monsters. Let's Dance. Yeah. This is an album that exists. Other than Modern Love, which is a little too poppy, to be completely honest. It is far more accessible and far more, I feel like, trying to appeal to a wider audience kind of throws away some of the more artistic merit of Bowie's more niche aesthetics. It's certainly more radio focused, but Modern Love is still a catchy banger at the end of the day. It is very fun to listen to. And Let's Dance is an incredibly fun, again, catchy, accessible radio focus. Even at over 7 minutes long, people still listen to this. It still gets played on the radio, sometimes completely in full, which is to say that this is maybe Bowie selling out. There's the cover of China Girl, covering Iggy Pop's version of China Girl, which Bowie, if I'm not mistaken, helped co-write at the time anyway. So in a sense, this is still a Bowie original, just, with Bowie now as the center performer. But this version of China Girl is not as good as the Iggy Pop version, and this album in general is not as good as everything that came before it, pretty much. That might be a hot take to some, but for me, that should be an incredibly cold take. Other than Let's Dance, which even that is kind of bland and repetitive, there isn't too much going for this LP. It's Bowie selling out, and it marks the beginning of Bowie's dark age in the fact that he truly sells out and kind of loses focus in the 80s. Unfortunately so. We're going to put this one in between C and D. It's not as good as Lodger. It's not as good as Young Americans. But it is stronger than his debut and Pinups, which is no surprise. Tonight, yikes. We're going to put this one between E and F. It's not a very good record. In fact, other than Loving the Alien, which also is far too long and too bland and too radio focused, and other than Blue Jean, which again, same kind of idea, except at least it's not 7 minutes long. Blue Jean is still him selling out, and is a little bit more just uninteresting and uninspired. But this whole album is uninspired. We won't say any more than that. And then we got Never Let Me Down. Whew. Never Let Me Down. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put it down at the bottom. This is F. This is perhaps his worst record. There is nothing redeemable about this album. Its production is dated. It is bland. It is uninspired. The songwriting is joyless. The performing, Bowie doesn't even feel like he's really in it anymore. It doesn't feel like he has that passion in his chest like he did with his 70s output, which was just like, heat after heat after heat. Creatively, this thing is bankrupt. It's an F. It's a bad record. I'd give it a 2 out of 10 on a good day. But I still would feel like I'm being waterboarded. Into the ears, of course. Black Tie, White Noise. Now we're in the 90s with Bowie. And with the 90s, Bowie was celebrating his marriage. No shame in that. Who doesn't like the joy and the love of a beautiful marriage? Especially this marriage, which lasted even after his passing. We are, of course, talking about his wife, Iman, who he married in the early 90s, and who he very clearly loved and adored more than any other woman that came before, which is saying a lot because this man got around, but it seems like when it came to Iman, there was a whole new appreciation and love poured into her that really took hold. And as you can see here from my liked songs, I liked quite a bit of it back when I would really, got into it, and it is one I have come back to a few times. I like Jump They Say. I like the title track quite a bit. I remember I loved the track Miracle Goodnight. Looking for Lester. I remember it's like a pure, I believe, instrumental track that is also fantastic. There is a lot going on in this album. It may not be the most creatively groundbreaking album. It may not feel like Bowie is kind of pushing things personally, but it does feel like Bowie is at least happy. Whereas Never Let Me Down, I did not feel even any sense of happiness in it. We're going to put this one, though, Black Tie, White Noise, coming in right here, just underneath Lodger. It's not as strong as Lodger. It's not as strong as Young Americans. It's a solid 5 out of 10 record in the sense that it would be completely average by most people's standards. There's some filler on here for sure, but it's a decent record. Buddha of Suburbia. This is a soundtrack album for, I believe, a TV show at the time, but it is still considered by many to be part of the Bowie canon. This feels like it takes some of the ideas off of Black Tie, White Noise, expands on them, and does feel like Bowie kind of settling with the sound. There's nothing too great here. It's kind of a forgettable record. Maybe that's because of the fact that it is part of a soundtrack. However, this one does contain Sex in the Church, which, as repetitive as it is, for some reason I remember I really liked it. But other than that, there's nothing here too stand out-ish. This one's a solid E record. Like a solid 4 out of 10. I would actually put it above Pinups. And then we've got Outside. Oh boy, do we have Outside. I am not a fan of this record. Some people are huge fans of this record. Some people say this is Bowie's best 90s record, to which I strongly disagree. Even though this is Bowie re-collaborating once again with the great, incredible producer Brian Eno, this is part of a series of albums that just never continued. This is a murder mystery that feels very half-baked, not very fleshed out, not very interesting, and unfortunately is not a record I ever find myself wanting to go back to. Its eerie, industrial sort of sound and tone is certainly unique, and is a nice breath of fresh air after those last 2 LPs, feeling like he's kind of settling into a kind of soul R&B tone that doesn't really take off. Outside is an industrial, eerie kind of mess. There's a lot of skits that take place throughout this LP to create a story. There's a lot of ideas put full on display with characters that are, as wildly eccentric as can be, but none of it feels fully realized. And unfortunately, other than the track We Prick You, there is nothing here I really enjoy. Outside is a dud, in my opinion. And I've tried. Trust me, I have tried to listen to this thing time and time again. But no matter how many times I find myself going back to it, it does not do anything for me. And in fact, it feels more exhausting than anything to try to enjoy. Its ambitious ideas and what it was doing, with its cast and its characters and its story does boost it a little bit from being a bottom of the barrel album. But I would actually rather listen to Buddha of Suburbia over it. But I'll say one thing, it's also still better than Pinups. Earthling. Oh, let's talk about Earthling. Earthling. This is actually a good fucking record. Call me crazy, but this is Bowie's best 90s record. Some people like this record a lot. Some people love this record like I do. But some people I've seen really rip into this thing and say it's dated and bland and it feels like Bowie trying to jump onto a trend. And while it is true that this isn't necessarily as forward-thinking as, obviously, Bowie's infamous 70s run, where it felt like he was always pushing the norm, and this is an album where he is just jumping on the electronic sort of trend, kind of stepping away from the industrial tones of Outside and instead embracing the electronic elements of it, going full into the drum and bass subgenre of kind of like electronic music. It is one of the best, I would say, drum and bass albums I have personally listened to. I really enjoy this one. I'm not being ironic. I know some people don't like it, but I love the kind of long compositions of it. I love the kind of slow, meticulous building of some of these tracks. And this 9-track album only has 2 tracks that I remember I didn't come back to too much, which unsurprisingly are the lowest streamed ones. But man, Battle for Britain, I loved 7 Years in Tibet is incredible. Little Wonder kicks things off hard. An incredibly powerful techno, electronic track list, looking for satellites, dead man walking. I'm just a dead man walking. And then I'm afraid of Americans. First time I heard that was to the credits of a movie. I can't remember, but I do remember when I heard that, I was like, what the hell is this? At that point, I already heard the 70s run of Bowie, but I had not heard 80s and 90s. And I heard I'm Afraid of Americans, and I was like, this track is incredible, and I can't wait to hear this album. And then when I did, the rest of the album was just as strong as that track. So I don't care what anyone says. I'm an Earthling defender. I'm an Earthling lover. I love everything about this LP. It is just fantastic. There is nothing that you could say that'll change my mind. But it's not S tier. But it is Bowie's. I would say this is Bowie's most underrated LP by a decent margin. And I would put it in the A tier. I don't care what anyone says. Unfortunately, it does hurt to put it above, these albums underneath it, because these albums are, I would say, more accessible. I don't find myself going back to Earthling that often, but every time I do, for a good week or so, I'm listening to it thinking this thing is great. So we're going to put it right here. It's also more fully realized than these projects, so take that, if you will. Hours, just shrink that down. Let's put this right next to Never Let Me Down. I'm not even going to talk about Hours. If you're interested in what I think of it, then just imagine a fart sound, because it's better than Never Let Me Down, but that's like putting sprinkles on a pile of shit. That's how much better it is, because Hours sucks. Let's go to Heathen. Heathen, we're in the 2000s now. David Bowie's early 2000s output, really his only 2000s output, was Heathen and Reality. And the two of them kind of blend together for me, although one is more interesting than the other, and that's not going to be Heathen. Heathen is kind of bland. There's not too much here I really care for. Again, I feel like this is just like the traditional, as expected, aging rock star who doesn't quite fully know where he belongs in the current music industry. Feels like a rock star who gave everything he could and had, at that point, just had like an absence of ideas. I'm going to go ahead and put this in D. I don't really have any D records, I just noticed. It's stronger than his debut. It's stronger than these LPs here. But really what it comes down to is, at that point, he's just a artist who is sure of himself musically, but kind of said all his best ideas at this point and didn't really know where to go. It does sound like I absolutely hate and loathe Heathen, but I just personally don't really enjoy much on there. It's also quite a bloated record at an hour long. There's not too much here that is that interesting, although these are remixes, so I guess it's shorter than that. I do not know the exact runtime, but it is an album I don't really go back to, so it's kind of hard for me to go too in-depth about it. Even when I did the preparation for this video of listening to every Bowie album, Heathen, it kind of just went in one ear out the other. Reality is also, I would say, another example of an aging rock star who doesn't really know his footing in the music industry. But this time, even though he's not as, groundbreaking or interesting, there are some tracks on here I really like. Pablo Picasso, I think, is great. Looking for Water, I think, is really fun. There's also the track Loneliest Guy, which I think is a very good emotional track. New Killer Star, Days, Try Some Buy Some. I also love that one. I actually forgot how good some of this album is. But every time I see the track list, those are the ones that jump out to me. The rest of the track list does not. I've tried Bring Me the Disco King. I know people really like, but I don't personally care for it that much. It's another one that feels a little bland and also far too bloated. If you take it for what it is, this is certainly better than Heathen. It's certainly stronger than Heathen. And I would say stronger than even Let's Dance, because the performances of Loneliest Guy, Try Some, Buy Some, Pablo Picasso are more interesting, more invigorating than all these other LPs down here. I would even put it above Black Tie, White Noise. All right, we are getting close to the end here of the video. Let's go into the next day. The next day is Bowie taking some ideas of the past, transforming them. As you can see with this cover, it feels like he is saying, that's it, this is the end of that chapter. Let's go into the new one, the new era, by taking the cover of Heroes and slapping on white sticker that says the next day. Very bold decision. An album cover that I actually think is quite nice. This video is not about album covers, but I do think that is a solid album cover. There is certain things about this LP that are incredible. It is very well produced. Some of the best production of Bowie's in decades, maybe since Scary Monsters, to be quite honest with you. It's very warm, it's very sharp, it's very calculated. The title track is very bold and in your face, bold and brash, one might say. And you have things like Dirty Boys, Valentine's Day, Where Are We Now is an incredible ballad. You Feel So Lonely You Could Die, Heat are also really great tracks. But you have things like Dancing Out in Space, which, oh boy, that is a dud as far as I'm concerned, a certified dud. But still, all in all, this is a nice comeback album. This is a decade after he softly retired for a little bit there after an unfortunate incident on stage. And this is where Bowie certainly feels much more creatively refreshed, unique, by far his best album in well over a decade. Would I say it's as good as his classic 70s run albums, some of the best ones up there? It approaches that level. I do think it is a tad maybe overrated. Some people I've seen say that this is a top 5 Bowie album. I do not think so. But I do think that production-wise and performance-wise and idea-wise, this is Bowie really making a strong comeback. This is a solid, I would say, B tier record. Maybe actually, I'll say it's a B A tier. It's going to be Dancing right here. Dancing Out in Space. It's not as strong as Earthling, which I know might be a hot take, but that's where I stand on that because the Earthling is a record I truly love and enjoy. But I would say that overall, it is stronger, it is more cohesive, and it is more, full of bold ideas than even Diamond Dogs. Now, as we get to Black Star, Black Star, as you could see, okay, this is, where do I even start? This is Bowie's swan song. This is Bowie's final album. He knew he was dying of cancer. He gave it his all. He put some of his most unique ideas forward, most experimental rock elements forward. Very groundbreaking, very ahead of its time, still sounds very refreshed. And even to this day, there are certain Easter eggs throughout this thing that I feel like Bowie fans are ever so slightly picking away at. It is just a very bold LP that addresses themes of death, fame, status, giving your all, love, religion to an extent, the occult. This is a really bold record that I feel like is a great tribute to the fans. It captures every single kind of idea I feel like he discussed throughout his entire career. It wraps it up in a great package and really feels like the album where he makes like a final statement on a lot of these ideas, such as the supernatural, his own fame, the concept of death. This is a really crazy record. It's breathtaking. The title track is perfect. I can't give everything away. Makes me tear up. I've cried to that track. I've bawled to that track because of how earnest and sincere it sounds from Bowie himself to me, a hardcore fan. Sue or In the Season of Crime, Dollar Days. There really isn't anything bad about this record. In fact, there's a reason there's a little gap here, and that's because I would say that this is an easy 10 out of 10, an easy S tier record, and without a doubt, like a necessity, not just for Bowie fans, but a necessity for music fans to listen to. So let's slide these guys over, and there it is. It's a 10 out of 10 record. Black Star is, I would say, even above Ziggy Stardust. Obviously, Ziggy Stardust and Scary Monsters are more accessible and are certainly far more replayable than that of Black Star. It is an experimental rock record with some jazz rock leanings that obviously I don't expect a lot of people to get into. But as a Bowie fan, and I feel like to most Bowie fans, Black Star is one of his boldest and also most sincere and most just laying it all out for the fans kind of record. This is a swan song made for the fans that feels like a beautiful gift. There's not too much to say about Black Star. It is obviously, it's perfect. It is a perfect record. God, the sound on it is both warm and cold at the same time. I don't know how he did it. But that is the tier list. That is the ranking. I'll quickly go over it, and then we'll close out the video. Coming in last place, we've got Never Let Me Down at the 26th place. 25th place, we've got Hours, 1999 record. Not very good. Then we've got Tonight coming in at the 24th place. 23rd place, we've got Pinups. 22nd place, we've got Outside. 21st place, we've got Buddha of Suburbia. Just not a very good album in its own right. Feels like a soundtrack album, unfortunately. And then we've got, at the 20th place, his self-titled debut album. Campy, but certainly hints at what's to come. 19th place, we've got Heathen. Then we've got, at the 18th place, Let's Dance. Again, him selling out, but still very fun, very funky. 17th place, we've got Black Tie, White Noise. 16th place, we've got Reality. Coming in the 15th place, we've got Lodger, the third part of the Berlin trilogy. Coming in at the 14th place, we've got Young Americans. Coming in at number 13, we have The Man Who Sold the World, where Bowie deals with the occult, the supernatural, those themes there, and kind of leans into a hard rock, maybe metal-esque glam rock tone. Coming in at the 12th place, we've got Space Oddity, a.k.a. David Bowie, 1969 self-titled, where he bursts on the scene with Space Oddity. Coming in at 11th place, we have Diamond Dogs, a messy but great fun record with Halloween Jack as the main character. Now we are entering the top 10 records. Coming in at 10th place, we have The Next Day, a strong comeback album, incredible production, some of the best production in his career, to be honest with you. At the 9th place, we have Earthling, incredibly underrated, his most underrated, I would say, electronic drum and bass LP. 8th place, we've got Hunky Dory. I know that hurts people. People expect this to be higher probably, but I still think this thing is near perfect. It is a solid 9 out of 10 record with some great folk rock elements and, a tease of the glam. 7th place, we've got Aladdin Sane. Not too much to say there. It's edgy. It's the Rolling Stones of Bowie. 6th place, Heroes. 5th place, we have Station to Station, making our top 5. An incredibly well-constructed, well-layered, well-arranged, beautiful plastic soul record where he mastered that sound for sure. A solid 9.5 kind of record. Depending on the day, I might even call it a 10. Depending on the day, I might call it a 9. It really bounces back and forth. 4th place, we have Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, which I feel confident in its placing. Super accessible, super enjoyable throughout. Discusses many interesting, complex themes while still being as catchy and as fun as possible. Then we got Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which obviously a classic record, a great concept that is perfectly captured in the glam rock aesthetics. Coming in the 2nd place, we have his swan song, his final album, Black Star. It's hard-hitting, it's emotional, it's beautiful, it is a pure gift for the fans. It is as experimental as Bowie ever got, and it is incredibly bold for it. Great record. And coming in at number 1, one of the greatest records I've heard in my entire life, one of the best albums ever made, Low, 1977, Low by David Bowie. A perfect record, a 10 out of 10. Perfectly captures an atmosphere of a time and place that feels very significant to both Bowie and I would say history in general, capturing the eeriness of Berlin while still feeling very relatable to anyone around the world. It is a perfect record, like many of the records in the top 10 here. But that does it for the David Bowie tier list / ranking video. If you enjoyed this, if you're still watching, thank you for watching this entire thing. It is a long video. It's a big video. It is one I wanted to do for a very long time, and I appreciate you watching alongside myself. But that does it for today's video. If you have any more tier lists you'd like to see me do, obviously maybe some discographies much smaller than this, go ahead and leave some suggestions down below. I've thought about doing one for the band Ween. I've thought about doing one for the hard rock classic band Led Zeppelin. Maybe a Beatles one. I don't know. I kind of want to do a lot more tier lists. They are fun. They're enjoyable to do. Throw some suggestions down there. We'll see what we can do. But, as always, my name is Randy Joe. I appreciate you watching, and I thank you for 1,000 subscribers, and I'm signing off.